back on the record. Ms. Latour, you indicated right before the recess that the next witness may be one where an inquiry may be necessary.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
And I'd like to be heard at some point, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
I just to preserve the record, Your Honor, I would like to, and I understand what the ruling is going to be, so I'm not going to argue long. So I want to restate the record that the defendant requested to call Your Honor as a witness because the defendant thought it would become a relevant issue to the jury about the knowledge of people knowing that my wife worked for me in my office. I'd like to further state for the record that the court was under the impression when Tom Ford was the prosecutor that I think the quote was, "It's inconceivable to think AOC didn't know that my wife was working for me." The state has now elicited evidence that attempted to put doubt in the jury's mind about that. And I know I have other remedies in terms of calling other witnesses, but I just note that for the record because I know that the court made that observation in a previous ruling. I was concerned that this type of effort was going to be made, and I just want to preserve the record on that issue.
All right, thank you. The renewed motion is denied. So, Ms. Latour, who is your next witness?
Craig Blitzer.
All right, Mr. Blitzer, could you come forward, sir? Have a seat, sir. Mr. Blitzer, are you represented by legal counsel, sir?
Yes, sir.
All right, and are they present today?
They are not.
Okay, then I want to talk to you about your privilege against self-incrimination. And you're an attorney, is that correct, sir? You're trained in the law, let's say that way.
Well, I would go with that, yes, sir.
All right. You completed law school and you've previously been licensed as an attorney in the state of North Carolina, is that correct? Former elected district attorney.
Correct.
All right. Should you testify in this case, I want to make you aware that you'll be waiving your constitutional privilege against self-incrimination. And what that means is that should you choose to testify, you'll be required to answer truthfully to questions posed to you both by the state as well as questions posed to you by the defense. Do you understand that?
I do.
All right. And you'll be required to answer those questions even if, and let me understand, I think I recall from pretrial hearings that your posture at this point is you have pleaded guilty to misdemeanor offense. Is that correct? And you are awaiting sentencing in that matter. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. So even if the responses that you give in connection to questions that are posed to you, even if they would be harmful to your position, namely against your self-interest with respect to a sentencing proceeding or revealing additional wrongdoing or anything of that sort, you'd be required to answer that. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
Have you had an opportunity to discuss this issue with your counsel?
I had this morning, yes, sir.
All right. And do you feel that you're fully informed about the ramifications of the waiver of your Fifth Amendment privilege should you take the stand and testify?
Yes, sir.
All right. Very good. Then I'm going to find that you have knowingly and, well, let me ask, do you intend to take the stand and testify to these matters, sir?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I'm going to find that you have knowingly, voluntarily, and willfully waived your Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination, and that you've done so with the advice of counsel and also based on your training experience find that you have a full comprehension of the scope of that waiver. So thank you, sir. All right, very good. Are there anything else that we need to take up before we call the jurors back in?
Not in the state, Your Honor.
If you'll resume your seat back there, we'll call you up. Come back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Latour, is there further evidence for the state?
Yes, Your Honor. The state would call Craig Blitzer.
Sir, if you would please place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right. Sir, you solemnly swear the testimony you give before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Latour?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Blitzer.
Good afternoon.
Will you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name's Craig Blitzer.
All right. And Mr. Blitzer, how are you currently employed?
I'm a commercial airline pilot for American Airlines Group.
How long have you been flying for American Airlines?
August 21, American Airlines Group,
I'm sorry.
since August of last year.
Okay. And what was your employment before that?
I was an assistant district attorney 96 through mid of 98, private practice from May of 98. I became the elected district attorney in Rockingham County January 1, 2015.
Okay. And was that the last employee that you held until your current position?
Correct.
And so at that time, you were a licensed attorney?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you currently hold a license to practice law?
I do not.
And as a result of, well, we'll get to that in just a moment, but where did you go to law school?
University of Arkansas in Fayetteville.
And where are you originally from?
Born?
Born.
New York.
Born and raised there?
Yes, sir.
And what brought you to North Carolina?
After graduating law school, seemed like a pretty good place to go.
All right. And when you settled here, where did you settle initially?
Initially in Chapel Hill for the bar review, then Fayetteville, then up in Rockingham County when I was offered the job as an assistant DA.
Okay. And as an assistant DA, what were your job duties?
Started off in traffic court, misdemeanors, then worked my way up, and when I left there in May of 98, had started doing major felonies in Superior Court.
Around how long had you been an assistant DA?
Early January of 1996 through early May 1998, about just shy of 2.5 years.
All right. And you say from there you went on to private practice.
Correct.
What does that mean?
Worked for myself, had an office with another attorney initially, then went out on my own in my own office. Then I wound up doing mostly first-degree murder cases through Indigent Defense Services, and wound up just shutting down an office and just walking because all my clients were incarcerated because of their first-degree murder charges.
Okay. Well, are you married?
I am.
And who are you married to?
Cindy Blitzer.
How long have you two been married?
July of 98, so coming up on 20 years.
Okay. And did Cindy work with you when you were in private practice?
Not as an employee, she wasn't paid, but yeah, she assisted me.
Okay. And did you know the defendant, Wallace Bradsher,
In what regard?
before you became an elected district attorney?
We had co-defendants in a murder case.
Okay. Were you guys friends?
No.
When you had co-defendants in a murder case, what does that mean?
2 people were charged with killing 1 person. Mr. Bradsher got appointed one defendant, I got appointed the other.
And in doing so, is that how you got to at least meet him?
Correct.
And around what year was that?
Early 2000, 2002, 2003 maybe.
All right. Other than that case that you guys had co-defendants on, did you two have any dealings at that point?
No, sir.
At some point in your career, did you get the idea, or were you to run for elected district attorney?
My local sheriff in Rockingham County in middle of 13 asked me to run.
Okay.
So I was giving that thought, ultimately obviously did, but it started in July of 2013.
And at that point in time, do you know if the defendant was already an elected district attorney?
He was.
And where was he the elected district attorney?
9A, Caswell and Person counties.
Okay, that's not the first time we've heard that number and letter combination, 9A. Can you describe for us essentially how district attorney jurisdictions or prosecutorial districts are broken down?
Sure. There's 100 counties in the state of North Carolina, and the legislature has simply carved out certain counties and given them numbers. Rockingham County, where I was a single county, 17A. Other counties in the northwest area of the state, for example, maybe 4 or 5 counties in their judicial district, and they're just given a number. This is 10, just because the legislature says it's 10.
Right. So it has, in your understanding, does it have any real meaning, the number, other than?
No, not at all.
Just a way to keep track of?
Yes, sir.
And you say eventually you became the elected district attorney of Rockingham County, correct?
Correct.
And that number is what?
17A.
All right. And at the time, the defendant, Mr. Bradsher, was the elected district attorney of where?
Caswell in person, which was 9A.
Now, just to orient those of us who may be geographically challenged, can you tell us where that is within the state?
Sure. Rockingham County is just north of Greensboro. After Rockingham County is the Virginia line, Danville. If you're looking at the map and you go east of Rockingham County, that's Caswell County, Yanceyville. If you go east again, that's Roxborough Person.
So there are 3 counties in a row at the northern border of the state.
Yes, sir.
And from here in Raleigh, it would be northwest.
Correct.
Okay. And it's coming west to east, Rockingham, Caswell, Person?
Correct.
All right. So when you eventually became the district attorney and when you were a practicing attorney in Rockingham County, that prosecutorial district and county is directly next to one of the defendant's counties, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you say that at some point you were approached by your sheriff about the possibility of you running for district attorney.
Correct.
Initially, what was your thought process when he approached you with that?
Well, there's pros and cons of being in private practice and pros and cons of being an elected official. So I remember that date because my wife and son and I have family in South Florida. We had just come back from a vacation. So obviously one of the major issues was it was a tremendous pay cut from private practice. There were some benefits, such as the state paying for my benefits, as opposed to me carrying them privately, but overall it would be a significant reduction in income. At the time, my wife was finishing up nursing school, so I felt that my loss in pay might be balanced by her starting her nursing, but that was obviously a conversation I had to have with her when the sheriff mentioned it to me.
And did you talk with anyone else about the possibilities of this or the ramifications and or ways to get around this reduction in pay?
I had an unrelated civil matter, ironically, in Caswell County, a custody matter that led to a contempt charge. And
when you say you had that, is that a case that you were representing something?
yes, sir. I'm sorry. Yes, sir. I was the legal counsel for one of the parties. And frequently in private practice, when we try to do what's called global settlements, so that if we resolve issues 1 through 3, there's no point if you can't resolve issues 4 and 5. So we would try to wrap everything up. So the party that I was representing was facing a civil contempt charge. There was a pending custody issue, and the party I was representing had criminal charges that originated in Mr. Bradsher's jurisdiction against the other party. So basically what we were trying to do is the other lawyer make the civil contempt go away, which he or she can do by a filing, and he wanted me to convince Mr. Bradsher to make the criminal case go away because I didn't have the power to make that happen, only Mr. Bradsher did. So part of what I worked out with the other attorney was, well, let me go talk to Mr. Bradsher, and if I can get him to dismiss the criminal case, then his stuff will be dismissed, my client's stuff will be dismissed, and everybody can go home and deal with it another day.
Okay. And did you go have that discussion with the defendant?
I did.
Around what time was this?
I still believe it was relatively in the latter part of 2013, maybe late summer, late August, early September.
2013?
Yes, sir.
And when you went in to have that discussion about this unrelated case, did you bring up the possibility of you running for district attorney?
I did.
And what did you say, if anything, to the defendant about that?
I mentioned to Mr. Bradsher that the sheriff had approached me in my county to run. In rural counties, politically, the backing of a sheriff is enormous. At that point in time, I didn't think I had much any opposition. Mr. Bradsher indicated that he didn't think he had opposition. And then I asked him point blank, I said, look, you were in private practice. We know there's a pay cut. How are you dealing with it? How are you making up for the lost income? Even though I didn't have any dealings with Mr. Bradsher for probably close to a decade following the end of that murder case, I knew that Pam Bradsher was working for him
How did you know that?
because counties were next door.
Okay.
I mean,
It wasn't hidden.
Oh, no.
I mean,
not at all.
everyone up there kind of knew that
Absolutely.
she was working there, including yourself.
Sure.
Okay.
So I basically just asked Mr. Bradsher if there's any problem with Pam working for him. And he said, no, it's, if she needs to pick up the kids, she picks up the kids. That the term he used was a family first policy. And he made it clear that that applied to everybody in his office. If you're sick, you're sick. If your children are sick or your child's sick, your child's sick. If you have to leave early, you have to leave early to take care of your children, your husband. We get it. But there wasn't, what I took from that conversation was I didn't have any problem if my wife had to work while she had one class left of nursing, that it was okay for me to hire her.
Okay. And so based on that conversation that you had with the defendant about his ability to have his wife work, you're saying that you felt that it would be okay for you then to have your wife work?
Correct.
Okay. Did your wife, Cindy, did she finish nursing school at that period of time?
She was actually scheduled to finish just before my primary in May of 14. So it almost became a moot issue because she was going to finish nursing, her nursing school at Forsyth. But the campaign became, she was heavily involved in my campaign as most spouses are. So she withdrew from her last class at Forsyth and was shy the one class.
Okay. And at that point then, I'm assuming you've decided to run for district attorney.
Yes.
When did you make that decision approximately?
I formally announced October of 13, I think, because my primary was May of 14, so I know I announced before Christmas of 13.
Okay. And did you in fact have opposition?
Only in the primary.
All right. And we've already kind of heard that you eventually became the DA, so I'm assuming, or did you win the primary there in your county?
Yes, sir.
And from that conversation in August or so of 2013 with the defendant until after your primary, did you speak to the defendant again that you recall?
No, sir.
Do you and your wife have any children?
We do.
And how many children do you have?
One son,
How old is your son?
15 and a half.
How old would he have been then when you first got elected to be DA?
The election or my swearing in?
Let's say when you were sworn in.
So he'd have just been a little over 13.
13-year-olds attend school, right?
They do.
Okay. Where was your child in school?
He was in Greensboro Day School.
And whose responsibility was it to take to take your son to school and pick him up from school?
I honestly did it mostly before I got sworn in because I was generally heading that way on my way to wherever I was going on a case and would try to time it to pick him up. But obviously if I was in court or couldn't, it was my wife's.
When you get elected to be the district attorney of Rockingham County, what'd you do about your wife's employment?
Well, since I was unaware that there was a prohibition of hiring one's wife, because when I went to the newly elected DA's conference December of 14, that was omitted from our 4.5-day presentation. And since I helped my wife fill out her employment application with the state, I know it's there because I wrote it when it asked, how did you hear about this job? It says, my husband's the newly elected DA.
Okay.
So I just hired her.
Okay. And at that point, you think everything's okay, right?
Correct.
All right. At some point, did you determine or were you made aware that everything was not okay with you hiring your wife?
Absolutely.
How did you become aware of that?
I received an email on the state email from Miss Wiggins, from Margaret Wiggins, who I think was the director of HR at the time.
Okay. May I approach your honor?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been previously introduced as State's Exhibit Number 2. If you will take a moment, after you've had a moment to look at that, if you will review it and tell me what, if anything, you recognize that to be.
Yeah, this is the email that I got from Miss Wiggins, because she says in it that she regrets that she didn't cover this at the new district attorney training.
Okay, so you got that email, and that's the way the news was broken, or is that the way the news was broken to you about the fact that you could not hire your wife?
Yes, sir.
And once you received that information from Ms. Wiggins, what's the next thing that you did?
I'm sure I reached out to Mr. Bradsher in some sort of panic, either by phone or text,
Okay, and why would he have been the one that you reached out to?
because Miss Bradsher had worked for him for 4 years. And he
Okay.
told me there was no problem.
That's based off that conversation that you guys had earlier in
Yes, sir.
2013?
Correct?
And the fact that you knew she had been working there.
Yes, sir.
And so when you reach out to him, what's your goal in reaching out to him?
I figure there's got to be a workaround or something that I'm missing or something that Miss Wiggins is missing, because a spouse is a spouse is a spouse. So why was it okay for Miss Bradsher but not okay for Miss Blitzer?
All right. And do you recall if the defendant responded to you?
I mean, I know he responded. I think I may have asked if he got this email. I'm sure I forwarded this, or at least my email, to him. But I don't recall exactly what or when he responded.
Okay. After you made him aware of this situation, what was the next course of conduct for you?
I believe Mr. Bradsher researched the ethics opinion, and the ethics opinion essentially said if you don't stop hiring a spouse or somebody covered by the nepotism statute, that it would fall into the lap of the senior resident superior court judge in your judicial district.
Okay. And you say you believe that that happened. Why do you believe that happened?
Because I know Mr. Bradsher drafted a letter to the Ethics Commission on our behalf following Ms. Wiggins' suggestion that we try to get a waiver. And seeing as the enforcement function of that ethics provision was in the form of the senior resident. So Mr. Bradsher's initial suggestion, and I say initial, I don't want you to think it was that day,
Right.
but ultimately the theory was if we run all decisions regarding our respective spouses through the senior resident, who according to the statute is the gatekeeper, then perhaps we can get that waiver.
Okay, now, you say that was his initial idea. Why are you relying on Mr. Bradsher, the defendant, to come up with this quote-unquote workaround? What's your role in all of this?
Well, I had been in office for all of 7.5 days. I had 3/4 of a new staff. I was preparing for major felony cases. I carried my own trial docket even as the elected DA. I tried my first major felony, I think 6 weeks in office. And I kind of didn't understand. I guess I was confused that AOC somehow got this wrong.
Okay. But again, are you in contact with AOC at this point, or are you
No,
just relying upon the defendant to do it?
I had no contact with AOC at all.
Okay. So at the time if I'm understanding you correctly, when you received that email from Margaret Wiggins, you've been in office for 7 days, or approximately.
Maybe 8 days and 12.5 hours.
Those first 8 days that you're in office, what are you doing?
Figuring out where files are, figuring out what cases can be ready for trial. It's very different in a small rural office where you have 7 assistants, and I think, including myself, at least 3 of us were new. I had 1 assistant who was out on maternity leave. 4 new, I'm sorry. So 4 new, 1 of the 4 very inexperienced, just out of law school. And the 2, I think, that were left, or 3 that were left, 1 was on maternity leave. So there are only 2 lawyers out of the 8 when I got sworn in who were previously at that office. Well, 3, I'm sorry. The 1 on maternity leave, 1 who was a Superior Court assistant, and the now current DA, who I don't think had much experience back then, just a couple of years.
Okay. So you let the defendant, Mr. Bradsher, kind of spearhead this operation?
I did.
Okay. And the conversations that you two would have, how are you having these conversations?
I think we might have just been on the phone or texting. There certainly was no intent to not email. It just didn't seem to be the efficient way, because things, I mean, you read this and something's got to be done right now. And I've entered panic mode because I've taken a huge pay cut, and this says my wife can't work.
And by this point, she's not in nursing school,
Correct.
and is she enrolled? What's the likelihood that she gets that nursing degree very quickly at this point?
Oh, very quickly? No. There, for some strange reason, at least the schools that she's applied to, there's no such thing as, well, you're 95% done, we'll transfer those and you can take the last class here. You can start over here.
Okay. So the first issue that the defendant raises to you about this idea to work around, to use your phrase, AOC, was this allow a senior resident Superior Court judge to do the supervision, basically?
Essentially, a Chinese firewall, so to speak.
So kind of remove yourself from the supervision of your wives, but keep them employed in your
Correct.
offices.
Correct. But the problem that created, or the built-in problem to that, is it was going to take time to draft a letter to the Ethics Commission and get them to respond. The only saving grace, so to speak, is that if you ask them a question before they found out, if they deemed it unethical, I believe you kind of had a free pass because you were asking them about it beforehand.
Okay.
But we couldn't work around the time factor that the email from Ms. Wiggins says you can't do it, period, and we knew anything from the Ethics Commission was going to take some time.
So you wanted to ask permission, not forgiveness, from the Ethics Commission, essentially. Get ahead of it, but you didn't think you'd have enough time for that.
Getting ahead of it, absolutely, because I wouldn't say ask permission, because we couldn't keep our respective spouses employed anyway.
Okay. So did you guys adopt that first, as you put it, Chinese firewall? Did you adopt that theory and run with it?
Well, Mr. Bradsher drafted a letter to the Ethics Commission, which I think by the time it was written and the response was received was, I want to say, May or June. I mean, it was months. It was quite a while.
All right. Well, in the meantime, what did you do?
So we had Mr. Bradsher, his wife, myself, and my wife met at a local pizza place across from the Rockingham County Courthouse, because Mr. Bradsher indicated that he had a way to work around it if AOC approved it, while we waited to see what the Ethics Commission said.
Now, would this have been in
January of 15.
like January 12th or 13th of 2015?
Somewhere in early January, yes, sir.
And the local pizza place, what's the name of the pizza place?
Elizabeth's Pizza
Where is that located?
in Wentworth,
Which is in which county?
Rockingham County. It's
And-
right across the street from the courthouse.
All right. And whose idea was it to have this meeting?
Mr. Bradsher's.
And You said that in attendance at that meeting were you, your wife Cindy, the defendant, and his wife.
Correct.
Was anyone else there?
No, sir.
Tell us what happened at that Elizabeth's Pizza meeting.
Well, Mr. Bradsher indicated that he had a plan or an idea, if AOC approved it, that Ms. Bradsher would come work for me and my wife would go work for Mr. Bradsher. We made it very clear that, because I didn't want anybody to think I was screwing him over, so my wife and I,
Okay.
we told Mr. Bradsher from the get-go, my wife's got a nursing career ahead of her. She's one class away. She doesn't have any desire to work or retire with the state. And Mr. Bradsher indicated to me, well, my wife does, referring to Ms. Bradsher. And I said, well, if we can work around it, if my wife leaves your employment, that has nothing to do with Pam Bradsher working for me. One thing has nothing to do with the other. So then we talked about
Well, when you say if we can work around it, what are you meaning by that?
that if AOC approved Ms. Bradsher coming to work for me and my wife going to work for Mr. Bradsher.
Okay, and so you say if AOC approves this resignation and hiring,
Correct.
then if your wife eventually decides she does not want to work for the defendant anymore, you're not going to take it out on
Ms. Bradsher.
Ms. Bradsher.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. And we talked a little bit about our family needs. You know, my wife and I made it clear, my son is in a private school in the other direction. There's no bus. And it was all, and the same thing for the Bradshers. I believe they had a young child or a younger child, maybe in preschool or something. And we said, okay, well, if AOC approves it, if you have to go pick the children up or pick up or drop off, or after you drop off, when you get to the office, you get to the office. But, it was pending AOC approval, and we didn't do anything till they said it was okay.
Okay. Now, at that point, you talked a little bit about your son having to go to school. Is that something where your wife was going to have to take him every day?
Monday through Friday.
And you said that the school is in the opposite direction of where she would be employed.
Correct.
How long, if you're aware, does it take to get from your son's school at the time to where your wife was going to have to be working?
Probably an hour and 15, 20 minutes, depending on traffic.
Okay, and he was supposed to be at school at what time?
I think 8:15.
So would be then approximately getting to school, if you say it's an hour, or getting to work after dropping him off at 8:15, 9:15 or so.
Roughly, give or take a few, yes.
Okay, and what time did she have to pick your son up from school?
I think he got picked up at 3.
So if she's at work in the other county and has to pick him up at 3 o'clock, presumably she'd have to leave at 2 o'clock to get
Sure.
there by 3.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And that was Caswell, not Person. That would be another 35, 40 minutes probably.
So you'd have to add another 35 to 40 minutes to those times if she were going to be working in Person County.
Correct.
What was the agreement about, or what did you guys agree about where she would be working at the time?
I believe at the time it was just, she would just go to Caswell County. That Person was just simply too far.
What about Pam Bradsher? Where was she supposed to work?
In Rockingham County.
When you guys made this agreement about having your wives work for each other, what was the understanding about them actually conducting work?
The families came first. Whatever we needed to do or they needed to do to make their family home or our family home run smooth, sick children, school, that was okay.
Okay. Were your wives expected to go to the office and actually conduct work, though?
Sure, in the beginning.
Okay. And at some point, this change actually happens, right?
Yes, sir.
Fairly quickly after this Elizabeth's Pizza meeting?
Yes, sir.
Around how quickly?
I think within probably a week, if not less.
Okay. So in under a week, you've actually talked to AOC, or your understanding is the defendant has actually talked to AOC, or did you talk to AOC about it?
I never spoke to AOC at all, ever,
Okay,
about this.
okay. When you find out that AOC says, okay, the switch can happen, you can hire Pam Bradsher, that's within a week of this Elizabeth Pizza meeting.
I think so, yes, sir.
All right. And does Pam Bradsher come to the office and work?
In the beginning, yes.
All right. Does your wife go and work for Wallace Bradsher?
In the beginning, yes.
Okay. What roles do you have Pam Bradsher performing in your office?
My office wasn't as structured as probably an office your size. Everybody there had been doing their job. I think I only had one new support staff member who was a paralegal who had been in the legal profession for 20 years. I knew Miss Bradsher had been doing it for 4 years. You know, most districts have similar needs in running record checks, DCI, criminal record checks, license checks, issuing subpoenas. So initially, everybody just found their own little niche. I mean, candidly, I was not there to babysit. I was really working hard, trying my own cases.
Okay. But I mean, when she comes there, she has to have a job, right?
Yeah, she was a victim witness legal assistant, yes, sir.
Okay, and what are the roles of a victim generally? I'm not saying every day
Right.
what she doing, but what are generally the roles of that?
Coordinate appearances with victims and witnesses, where they go, how they get into the courthouse, if they need to bring in a video or a cell phone, working with the sheriff's office to get stuff like that done, getting record checks done, helping them with victims' compensation if they suffered a loss or an injury. Taking in discovery from law enforcement,
All right,
roles like that.
okay. And she did that at least for a period of time, you said.
Correct?
And when you hired your wife, you had assigned her a set salary, correct?
Yes.
And when your wife resigned, or your employment of your wife, the separation occurred as far as work goes, and you hired Pam Bradsher, did you bring Pam Bradsher in at the same pay rate that you're paying your wife, or similar to it?
Yeah, I think that we just completely swapped names, because that was just easier than readjusting salaries and filling out additional forms. It was just easier to just swap like that.
Okay, so she comes there and assumes the salary that your wife had, and your wife would go to the defendant's county and assume the
Correct.
salary that his wife had.
Correct, because I know that Miss Bradsher actually made, I think, 1,000 and something less when she came to my county, and Mr. Bradsher and I had a conversation that I was willing to adjust that, and he said that it wasn't that big of a deal, the $1,200 or $1,300.
Okay. So, once this change occurs, how long does your wife make the commute to Caswell County, approximately?
My recollection is, I think it was early May, May of 15, gas was almost $4 a gallon still. Gas was becoming another mortgage type payment, the commute, and it was a very inefficient use of her time being on the road so much, twice a day, 5 days a week. So then she was allowed to work from home.
Okay. That's, when you say she was allowed to work from home, did she have a place set up in your office where she could work?
Well, in my physical office, my home, or the,
Your district attorney's office.
yes, they had what also helped facilitate that switch or change was Caswell County had no facilities for my wife. No desk, no phone, some office where the heat couldn't be controlled and it was stifling hot. And my office in Rockingham County, our courthouse was relatively new, so I actually had extra space, office space that wasn't available. So it was almost a win-win. There was phone access, computer access, a nice new office, and now the commute was bearable.
All right. And so at some point, there was an agreement made amongst all of you that Cindy would now come back and work in your office, but be supervised by someone in Wallace Bradsher's office?
Correct.
And when she came back to your office, whose work was she working on, yours or Caswell Person County cases?
She was working on a Rockingham County child homicide that I had a conflict with.
Okay. Is that a Shockley case? I think it's the name of the
Yes, sir.
defendant?
Yes, sir.
So you'd refer to it as the Shockley case?
Correct.
So the Shockley case is a child homicide case?
Correct.
And it's a case that originates in your jurisdiction, so it was your case first.
Correct.
You say it was a conflict case. What does that mean?
The child was killed, I want to say sometime in 2011 or 12, and the two lawyers that were on it, the senior lawyer, they were partners in a firm. One of them was relatively inexperienced, one was not. The senior partner in that firm was getting very ill, fighting cancer, and has since passed. So the junior partner had asked me if I would finish the case with him. For whatever it's worth, I don't think that created a conflict, but since it was a child death, it was easier just to not touch it when I became the DA, because I knew ultimately I would hear about it in some sort of post-conviction relief or some sort of manner. I would hear about it again, that this phone call took place. So it was just cleaner for me not to touch it. And it's routine for DAs who have conflicts to get other DAs to take those cases for them.
And so there was, at least in your mind, a perceived conflict that it might look bad if you were handling it, since you had had this phone call with the lawyer.
Correct.
And so in an effort to get out from under that, where do you send that case?
Mr. Bradsher had a social gathering, I think, just before I was sworn in, sometime around Christmas of 14, and I had mentioned that case to him at that point, and we had discussed his conflict cases that were sitting for a while, where no one in his office or he could touch, and what I would take those and he would take the Shockley case, and he understood, and we talked about the magnitude of the Shockley case. Baby murders are a different breed.
Right. So essentially, Mr. Bradsher agrees to take that case off your hands.
Yes, sir.
For his office to take that case off your hands.
Yes, sir.
Now, document-wise, is this a big case or a small case?
Oh, it's a huge case.
Okay. And so when you say it's a huge case, what are we talking about?
Probably thousands of pages of paper and hundreds of hours of audio and video.
Now, when he took that case from you, did he actually, at that point, take the files?
No, sir. The physical case and all of the components remained in Rockingham County because there was no legal change venue to Caswell Person. So there was a conversation that everything would stay there because that's where the case was going to be tried.
Okay. And is that, I think you testified earlier, that's the case that your wife ends up working on?
That's the case that Mr. Bradsher assigned to her, yes.
All right. And so it's a little complicated, but it's a Rockingham County case being handled by the person Caswell County District Attorney's Office.
Correct.
And the person that's assigned to be the legal assistant on that case is your wife, who now works for the defendant.
Correct.
Okay. And there was this discussion about her driving, and the decision is made that she can come back and work in your office for the defendant and work on that case.
Correct.
Now, while she's working on that case in your office, do you have any oversight, and was it ever your understanding that you were supposed to have any oversight over your wife?
My understanding was I was to have no oversight and purposely did not.
And during the course of that case's or your wife's involvement in that case, did you see her working on it at all?
Sure.
Okay. Would she work on it at home some?
Some stuff.
Okay. Did you ever talk to, other than that conversation you've already talked about, did you ever talk to the defendant about that case and your wife's involvement?
Later on, yes, sir.
Okay. At some point, well, let me ask you this. You said there was some discussion about, on a separate note, away from that Shockley case, you said there was some discussion about your wife in nursing school while you guys were at Elizabeth Pizza.
Yes, sir.
Did the defendant make any comments to you about nursing school as it relates to your wife and him?
He did.
What did you guys talk about?
When we told Mr. Bradsher that Cindy just needed one class to finish her nursing degree, and then her intent was to leave the state job or go do nursing, and that she was just one class shy, he told us fortuitously that he attended church with Elise Montgomery, who's the director of nursing in Person Community College.
Where is Person Community College?
In Person County.
Okay.
And that he was personal friends with Elise, that he knew the president of that school as well, and that he could get, earlier I testified that all the other nursing schools were saying, you can come here, but you have to start over. We're not going to let you take one class and graduate.
Right.
When we explained this to Mr. Bradsher, he stated essentially, because of his relationship with Miss Montgomery, that he was extremely confident that after he told her about Cindy's predicament, that Miss Montgomery, under her authority as the director of nursing, would let Cindy take the one class she needed and then would get Cindy a diploma from Person Community College.
Okay. And so that was the extent of the conversation at that time?
Correct.
Okay. Now, after that conversation, and your wife is now back working in your office but for the defendant, what's Pam Bradsher doing at this point?
Working in Rockingham County, I guess.
Okay. Does she work there for the entirety of her state employment?
I think I got a phone call August of 15 from Mr. Bradsher that Pam was going to resign from my office because she got a better paying job at Person Community College, and that they needed a letter of reference from me like that minute.
Okay.
So I prepared that and emailed it to somebody at Person Community College.
At some point, are you guys made aware that the ethics, that waiver of the Ethics Commission that you've requested has been denied?
Oh, yeah.
Around when are you made aware of that?
I want to think that letter came sometime in June of 15, but I'm not for sure. It didn't come to me. I didn't get the letter till much later, but Wallace, Mr. Bradsher told me. August the 14th, so if that letter did come around June, yeah, that would be about 2 months.
Now, that nursing school that at the community college that the defendant was going to get your wife into, or at least make some overtures or efforts to get her into,
Right.
did that come to fruition?
No, it did not.
Okay. How were you made aware that he was unable to get her into class?
Well, I would have a conversation with Mr. Bradsher about an update from Miss Montgomery, the director of nursing there, and I would relay to my wife what Mr. Bradsher said Cindy had to do to get in. And it seemed like every conversation the bar got higher and higher, ultimately to the point where Miss Montgomery, the director of nursing at Person Community College, was going to require Cindy to basically take what was tantamount to a state board for nursing to get in, which would be like anybody taking the state bar cold or their respective state exam. So when I explained to my wife what Mr. Bradsher said about the testing, and my wife explained to me that's like the state boards, I went back to Mr. Bradsher and said, Cindy can't take state boards, which is what this woman wants. So Mr. Bradsher went back to Elise Montgomery, or at least he told me he did, and then got back to me and told me that Miss Montgomery said that she would let Cindy take individual tests, and as long as she got a 70 or better, that was okay. If she didn't get a 70, then she would let Cindy orally defend her answers, and if it was acceptable, they would progress. And I don't know how many tests she had to pass till we eventually got there, but we never got there.
Okay. And did you let the defendant know that your wife wasn't going to be able to get into PCC?
I told Mr. Bradsher that Cindy passed the first test. The second test, she did not hit a 70. I think she maybe got a 68. Inquiry was made, when can I defend my answers? And Cindy was told that was not going to happen, and that the only way she could go to Person Community College was to enroll and start over. And when I told that to Mr. Bradsher, he was somewhat cavalier and didn't understand why she would say that to Cindy, because that's not what she was telling him.
Okay. At that point in time, was there any other conversation between you and the defendant about this community college?
Just that the president there was trying to get some funding for a building, and that Mr. Bradsher thought maybe he could use some political clout as the elected DA to get the president on board to see if he would overrule Miss Montgomery, the director of nursing, but none of that developed either.
All right. And at some point, that case that your wife's working on, the Shockley case,
Yes, sir.
at some point, does the defendant come and take that case back?
He does.
Okay, are you aware of when that happens?
I was aware that it happened, but I didn't know it was happening.
Okay. How were you made aware that it happened?
I came back to my office, it was March of 16, and I forget where I was coming from, but I came back to my office and was told by one of my support staff that Mr. Bradsher was there and had asked them to compile the Shockley case, that he was going to take it, which ironically, well, which I thought was good, because the victim's grandmother, the young boy's grandmother, was calling me asking about what was going on with the case, and I had no information to tell her. So I viewed them coming to physically take the file as well as finally going to get tried.
Now, once that case is taken back, or taken for the first time, I guess, technically, to the other counties, are you aware if your wife had any work to do?
I was aware that she had nothing to do.
Okay. And did you ever see her after that point? Well, how are you aware that she had nothing to do?
She told me. When she realized, and I don't know how she found out, if she knew.
Objection to the statement of Cindy. I'd like to cross-examine her, Your Honor.
Well, it's sustained as to any speculation about what she realized or how she found out, unless you have personal knowledge of that.
When I told Cindy that the Shockley case had been removed from the office in Rockingham County and taken by Mr. Bradsher, there was no cases left for her to work on.
Okay. And did you see your wife after that period of time?
At my house?
Okay. Did you ever see her at your office after that period of time?
No.
When you would see her at the house and see what had occurred at the house, was there ever any work that had been done at the house that you were aware of for the defendant
No.
by your wife?
No, sir.
Did you ever talk to your wife about whether or not she had any work to do for the defendant?
My wife had no work to do.
Objection. Again, Your Honor, just to
Sustained
give
as
some.
to non-responsive. question is, did you ever talk to your wife?
Yes,
And to your knowledge, did your wife have any work to do for the defendant after they took that Shockley case in March of 2016?
she did not.
Now, and I know I'm jumping around a little bit here in time, but that August time period when Pam Bradsher resigns her employment with your office,
Right?
did you hire anybody to take her place?
I did.
Who did you hire to take her place?
Tyler Henderson.
How did you come to, well, did you know Tyler Henderson?
I knew of him.
Okay. How did you come to hire Tyler Henderson to take Pam Bradsher's place in your office?
Tyler Henderson was employed by Mr. Bradsher in the Caswell Person office.
Okay. How did that lead to him working for you?
When Pam Bradsher resigned, Mr. Bradsher indicated that he was essentially allocating a support staff member, my wife, to work on a Rockingham County case, the Shockley case. So you have a 9A Caswell Person employee working on a Rockingham County case is zero productivity for Caswell Person. So Mr. Bradsher asked if I would hire Mr. Henderson and assign him to work in Caswell Person. This way, there's a Rockingham County employee, Tyler Henderson, producing in Caswell Person, and there's a Caswell Person employee, Cindy Blitzer, working on a Rockingham County case. So they essentially balanced out each other's workloads by working on each other's office caseload.
Okay, but that Shockley file was not your case anymore, correct?
Correct?
It's actually a Person Caswell County case at that point, because they had adopted that case, right?
Correct.
So, was Cindy working on Rockingham County cases, or was Cindy working on Person Caswell County case?
She was working on the, if I understand what you're asking, Caswell Person adopted the Shockley case, but it was a Rockingham County case.
It originated in Rockingham.
Yes, sir.
County.
Right.
But your office is not handling that, another office is handling it.
Correct.
So do you agree to hire Tyler Henderson?
I initially proposed that let me fill the slot and then we can transfer back just like we did with Miss Bradsher and my wife. But Mr. Bradsher wanted me to hire Tyler. I didn't see anything wrong with it as the hiring authority. And, you know, there was the unwritten implication that my wife is working for him.
What is that unwritten implication as you understand it?
Well, as I understood it, it was, you know, if Tyler Henderson can't work for Rockingham County, Cindy Blitzer may not have a job in Caswell Person. There's no offset anymore. Miss Bradsher.
To that assumption, Your Honor, unless he's saying that somebody said that.
Overruled, testify as to what your understanding was.
Didn't you?
The impression I got from that phone call was if I didn't hire Tyler Henderson at what was, I believe, tantamount to including a what, $12,000, $14,000 raise, I think, when he came to Rockingham. I don't know the exact numbers, but I know he got a significant raise. There was built-in security when Pam Bradsher was working for me and my wife working for Mr. Bradsher. But once Pam Bradsher resigned, there's no more security for Cindy Blitzer. So here's Tyler Henderson, hire Tyler Henderson, and everybody stays where they're at, and nobody's rocking the boat.
And so at some point you hire Tyler Henderson.
Yes, sir?
And you in fact just said that when you hired him, you gave him in your mind, substantial pay raise to be hired there.
Correct.
Was he then given the same money that Pam was making?
I don't know if it was dollar for dollar, but it probably would have been easier, just the same thing, to just put him in that slot and not jockey with the pool of money.
When you hired Tyler Henderson, did you assigned Tyler Henderson any work for your office?
No, I assigned him to Mr. Bradsher's.
And when you hired Tyler Henderson and assigned him to Mr. Bradsher's office, was there ever any discussion about him doing any work or any information share or anything like that with your office?
None whatsoever.
As far as you were concerned, did you have any supervisory role over Tyler Henderson's day-to-day work?
I did not.
Who had, in your opinion, that?
Mr. Bradsher,
Why is that?
because Tyler Henderson was working there before, was working there. The only thing that changed was what pool of money his paycheck came from. Instead of coming at a Caswell person, it came out of Rockingham.
When Craig Blitzer, I'm sorry, Mr. Blitzer, when the defendant, did he personally come to your office to take that Shockley file back?
Yes. He and at least one or maybe two other people were with him.
Did you and he have any discussion at that point?
We did.
What did you two talk about?
We talked about, we talked a little about the upcoming DA's conference at Ocracoke that was coming up in April. We talked about Jay Stoltz, who I believe at that time was Mr. Bradsher's or one of Mr. Bradsher's chief assistants, was going to supervise Cindy at that point, and that Mr. Bradsher wanted Cindy to vary her hours, how she logged them, start using some vacation time or sick time or half days, just not putting in 8, 5 days a week.
What was your understanding of that discussion as far as the varying the hours?
I had told Mr. Bradsher at that, when we met that day, that I had heard December of 15 about the SBI investigation. And that comment came on the heels of that.
Okay. What specifically did you tell him?
I told him that I heard the SBI was investigating whether or not Cindy was actually showing up to work, or words to that effect.
Okay, well, at that
And
point,
that-
was Cindy actually showing up to work?
Up until that day, yes.
Okay.
The question at that point was whether Cindy was physically showing up in Caswell Person and whether Miss Bradsher was physically showing up in Rockingham.
That was your understanding.
Correct.
And so when you say that there's this SBI question about work, his response to you was what?
Well, I don't know what the chronology was with regard to Mr. Stoltz supervising Cindy, but in light of the rumor of the investigation, that it would be beneficial if Cindy started varying her time in the state's beacon or timekeeping system.
You said something about vacation or along those lines. Was he telling you?
In other words,
that she needed to take vacation, or what was your understanding of the discussion?
So Cindy was logging 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for her 40 hours. My understanding, based on what Mr. Bradsher said to me, was maybe she should log 8 on Monday, 8 on Tuesday, and maybe use 4 hours of vacation on Wednesday, and maybe take 2 hours sick on a Friday, start varying rather than 8 times 5, 8 times 5, 8 times 5, 8 times 5, start using comp time, sick time, vacation time to vary it in the state system.
What would that do? What would that do?
I have no idea. I guess it would look like, I don't know.
Mr. Latour, it's 5 o'clock, so we're going to recess for the afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll resume at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Please recall the instructions. Don't talk about this case among yourselves or with anyone else. Don't form or express opinions about the outcome. No media or independent investigation into these matters. No conversations with parties, witnesses, or lawyers. Leave your notepads and those printed materials in your chair. I'm going to ask the bailiff to go ahead and collect the exhibits that were handed out to you. And we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9:30. Thank you very much for your service. Everyone else, please remain seated while the jurors excuse themselves. All right, outside the presence of the jury, Mr. Latour, Ms. Bradsher, do you intend to use State's Exhibits 1 or 2 in connection with this witness, or shall I have the bailiff collect them? They're the emails.
I don't intend to use any for the jury.
All right, right.
Fine.
Okay, so bailiff, if you do that. Any other matters that we need to take up before we recess for the afternoon?
Not for the state at this time.
No, Your Honor.
Be in recess until 9:30 tomorrow morning.
Superior Court stands in recess until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. God save the state is on record.
Thank you, sir.